What kind of man would set fire to his own villages, poison his own wells, and drive his people from their homes not in madness, but in cold, calculated strategy? In the spring of 1462, Europe found its answer. Vlad III of Wallachia, better remembered by history as Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler, was confronted by the unstoppable power of Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan who had conquered Constantinople less than a decade earlier. But instead of waiting for the clash of armies, Vlad prepared a different kind of battlefield, one carved out of ruin. When Mehmed's forces crossed the Danube, they did not find a land rich with crops, livestock, and villages to occupy. They entered a wasteland. Fields once golden with grain smouldered as black ash. Fruit trees, centuries in the making, were chopped down or burned. Livestock had either been driven into the mountains or slaughtered outright. Even the wells, the lifeblood of village life, were poisoned with rotting corpses. It was not only destruction, it was denial, the stripping away of every resource an invading army might rely upon. According to the Byzantine chronicler Laonikos Chalkokondyles, Vlad gave orders with brutal clarity. Nothing was to be left that could nourish or shelter the invader. His people either fled into fortified refuges or perished, ensuring that the Ottoman host would march through silence and smoke. And Vlad himself confirmed this in a letter to Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary, where he described without remorse, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young. We have burned down everything." To him, devastation was not a crime, but a necessity. The Ottoman army, estimated at nearly 90,000 strong, found itself stranded in hostile country. Disease spread in the ranks, horses collapsed from hunger. Soldiers muttered of curses and omens, for no matter where they turned, the land itself seemed to rise against them. Here, Wallachia became Vlad's weapon, not with swords and shields, but with famine, fear, and despair. The great Sultan Mehmed, who had broken the walls of Constantinople with cannons, was forced to reckon with an enemy who fought by erasing the very ground beneath his feet. Yet starvation and exhaustion were only the beginning. For Vlad Tepes knew that terror could do what swords could not. As Mehmed's troops pressed deeper into Wallachia, they reached the citadel of Targovishte. There, they encountered not a garrison of defenders, but something far more haunting. Before the fortress walls stretched an enormous forest of wooden stakes, each bearing a lifeless figure. Thousands of them, arranged in rows that swayed in the wind. The Venetian ambassador to Buda described it with horror, while Ottoman chroniclers, such as Tursun Bey, admitted that even hardened warriors trembled at the sight. Soldiers who had faced cannon fire, cavalry charges, and sieges now faltered before an army of the dead. Among those displayed were not only peasants or nameless prisoners, but captured Ottoman scouts and envoys. It is said that when one group of ambassadors refused to remove their turbans before Vlad, citing their religious customs, he mocked them by nailing the turbans to their skulls and then raising them high on stakes. Whether the detail is true or embellished, multiple Saxon and Slavic sources record the act, preserving it as an enduring symbol of Vlad's merciless wit. Impalement itself was not Vlad's invention. Cultures across Asia and the Middle East had used it for centuries, and the Ottomans themselves employed it as a punishment. But Vlad refined it into something different, into theatre. Victims were impaled alive, a long stake driven carefully through the body so that they would not die quickly. Some writhed for hours, others for days, their agony a spectacle meant to sear itself into the minds of all who saw. The stakes were arranged in deliberate patterns, circles, lines, even shapes, like a grim sculpture garden of suffering. To foreign eyes, it appeared not only cruel but almost ritualistic, a calculated demonstration of dominion. One of the most infamous displays occurred during this very campaign. Chroniclers like Antonio Bonfini and Chalkokondyles report that Vlad ordered the impalement of approximately 20,000 captives, primarily Ottoman prisoners, though also Wallachians suspected of disloyalty. Outside Targovishte, these bodies were positioned in haunting symmetry, creating a vision of hell on earth. Tursun Bey, who accompanied Mehmed's forces, wrote that the Sultan halted his advance upon witnessing this grim spectacle. Mehmed himself, no stranger to bloodshed, reportedly admitted that a man capable of such acts could not be easily subdued. The effect was devastating. Ottoman soldiers recoiled, morale collapsing not under the strike of weapons, but the weight of fear. To many, this was no ordinary war, but a descent into nightmare. The scorched villages and poisoned wells had prepared the stage, but the forest of the impaled was the climax, an image designed to haunt Mehmed's men long after they turned their eyes away. Vlad Tepes had transformed execution into strategy, cruelty into a weapon sharper than any blade. His land was fire, his justice was the stake, and his message was carved into the bodies of the conquered. And yet, this was only the first act in his merciless campaign of 1462. For what came next would not only terrify the enemy, but also send them home carrying his warning upon their very flesh. Vlad Tepes's war was not only against the Ottomans, he ruled Wallachia with the same merciless hand he turned toward invaders. Inside his own lands, impalement became not just punishment, but policy. Theft, deceit, betrayal offences that in other realms might have earned fines or exile were under Vlad's eye treated as existential threats. To him, every crime chipped away at order, and order was survival. Chroniclers tell of a woman impaled for lying about her husband's work obligations, her deception deemed dangerous to civic virtue. In another tale, merchants accused of cheating customers met the stake for undermining trust in Wallachia's fragile economy. Whether each account is literal or exaggerated by hostile Saxon scribes, the consistency of the reports paints a clear picture. Vlad enforced discipline not through laws written on parchment, but through fear written on flesh. His justice was brutal, but it was absolute. Yet, in 1462, when Mehmed's vast army pushed deeper into Wallachia, Vlad's punishment took a darker, more calculated turn. Death was final. But fear could walk, and so he turned living captives into his most terrifying weapon. According to Slavic sources compiled in the Skazany o Draculae Voivode, the tale of Prince Dracula, Vlad selected Ottoman prisoners not for execution, but for mutilation. Some had their noses cut off, their ears sliced away, or their eyes gouged out. Others were branded with hot irons, scarred in ways that would mark them forever. These were not acts of mercy. They were deliberate transformations turning men into walking warnings. Released back toward Ottoman lines, these broken survivors carried more than their wounds. They carried the message of the Impaler. Resistance was not only futile, it was horrifying. The cruelty reached beyond the body. Contemporary Slavic accounts suggest Vlad sometimes mocked the religious customs of his captives, searing symbols into their skin or forcing humiliations that struck at their spiritual identity. Some historians argue these were aimed at Muslim prisoners as deliberate provocations, though the exact details vary across sources. What is consistent is the intent, to turn punishment into spectacle and spectacle into psychological warfare. Imagine being a soldier in Mehmed's ranks, weary from hunger and disease, already haunted by the sight of thousands impaled corpses, and then seeing your comrades return, limping, mutilated, barely human. They were proof of Vlad's cruelty, yes, but also of his reach. It told the Ottomans that capture did not mean ransom, nor slavery, nor even execution. It meant degradation, designed to echo through the ranks like a poisoned whisper. This strategy of mutilated messengers was more corrosive than any single battle. Soldiers spoke of it in hushed tones, their morale crumbling. Even Mehmed II, a man who had stood triumphant on the walls of Constantinople, was unsettled. Chroniclers record that upon witnessing Vlad's forests of impaled prisoners and hearing of his mutilated survivors, the Sultan himself hesitated. To retreat was dishonor, but to advance against such a foe was to march into a nightmare. For perhaps the first time in his career, the great conqueror of the East faced not just an enemy, but a legend of terror made flesh. Vlad Tepes had mastered what few rulers dared to embrace: cruelty as policy, fear as a form of governance. To his enemies, he was a butcher. To some of his people, he was a savior, ruthless, yes, but capable of holding Wallachia together in the face of empires. His tactics blurred the line between sadism and strategy, leaving historians to ask even today, did Vlad revel in blood, or did he simply understand the mathematics of fear better than any man of his age? The campaign of 1462 did not end with Mehmed's destruction, nor with Vlad's total victory. Wallachia remained a fragile frontier, its fate pulled between greater powers. But the echoes of that summer were louder than any cannon. Scorched earth, forests of impalement, mutilated captives stumbling home as emissaries of terror. These were not just events, they were performances meant to live in memory, to seed dread, to make even the strongest empire hesitate. 9 years earlier, Mehmed II had taken Constantinople and proclaimed himself heir to Rome. Yet in Wallachia, he met a prince who ruled not through walls or armies, but through the human imagination. Fear itself became Vlad's fortress. And so his legacy endures, more than 5 centuries later, not only as the cruel tyrant who impaled tens of thousands, but as the warlord who understood that terror, when wielded with precision, could be as sharp as any sword and as lasting as stone. Which of his methods do you think most crushed Ottoman morale? The barren villages, the endless stakes, or the mutilated survivors? Tell us below. For in the end, Vlad's message was not written on parchment or carved in monuments. It was etched into bodies, burned into memory, and left to fade on the stake.